Hello, I'm Emma-Louise Coffey and you're welcome to the Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. On this week's episode, specialist George Ramsbottom joins us to take stock of the financial performance on dairy farms in 2019.
So we've about 400 spring milk producers have completed a profit monitor at this stage. And what we're seeing that milk yield is tending to be slightly higher than the average that was produced last year, which is kind of what we expected. Last year was a real drought year and there's a lot of feeding going on to try and support cows' lactation early on. And this year we see a higher milk yield. It was a better grass growing season, which is a good thing. We're also seeing a reduction in the amount of meal being fed. It seems to be lower. I'd say it's back to the equivalent of around €100 per cow over last year, which is about a third of a tonne of meal less, something more than that, towards the previous year, which is again a good indication of maybe a better grass growing year than last year. When we look at the co-op price, the co-op price has slipped. It looks to be running around a cent lower for the first completers of profit monitor this year towards the average for the whole of last year, which is probably kind of what we expected. We know the milk price is struggling a bit there across the summer and into the autumn. If we look then at the net profit being achieved on a per cow basis, I'd say we're looking at a slightly higher net profit per cow and a higher net profit per hectare. It'll be up towards the previous year. It'll be up around €150 a hectare this year compared to last year, which is good, but you know it's where we'd have expected it to be based on the year that we just passed through.
You mentioned milk yield, and I think that's very much in line with what Pat Dillon would have said a few weeks ago in terms of, you know, we've had our best year yet and fat and protein are as high as we've ever seen it. In terms of you mentioned there's 400 or so profit monitors completed to date. How many profit monitors are being completed in the country annually? So
annually we've 18,000 dairy farmers, and around between 2 and 2,500 will complete a profit monitor every year. So it's a relatively low penetration rate, and it's a great way of benchmarking yourself against other really good dairy farmers to see where you have strengths and where you could improve the way you're farming.
And say when we talk about these 2,500 dairy farmers, are they going to be kind of your average, or are we talking slightly above average if you're comparing yourself?
Yeah, so they'll be the top third nationally in terms of the kind of costs and output that they're achieving. So you're dealing with a really good group of farmers, guys that are and girls that are most efficient at producing milk relatively cheaply and achieving high levels of milk solids production as well. So you're comparing yourself against very good operators.
So delving in then to another point you made, meal feeding has reduced in the country, and you've put a figure on it, €100 per cow reduction in terms of meal feeding. And again, it does make a lot of sense. 2019 was a good year. Can you put a figure roughly what these farmers are feeding in terms of kilos per cow?
The average for the first 400 is coming in at around 5 cents a litre of meal feed costs, and there's almost 6,000 litres being produced. So it's coming close to €300 of a spend in 2019 on meal. So it'll be around 280, which is close enough to a tonne of meal being fed. But they're achieving from that then an average of 475 kilos of milk solid per cow. So it's relatively high meal feeding levels. We had a difficult spring, we had a very challenging autumn in parts of the country. So meal feeding levels are maybe higher than what we would target, but that's what they are.
And have you a comment on that in terms of, should farmers be targeting to feed less? Is this a hangover from 2018?
Yeah, so I don't think it's so much a hangover from 2018 as probably more moving into the autumn. We see well above average precipitation rates from August on, and that will have had a big impact. Cows certainly in the east and the southwest of the country came in a lot earlier than usual, and they were being supplemented with silage early. So there's a whole heap of reasons why the meal feeding levels were up. But I'd say it's less of a hangover from 2018 and more of an issue in terms of earlier housing and turning in the autumn time of the year.
And on the meal feeding, 5 cents a litre in 2019, what should farmers target?
So if we'd like to see farmers, or our target would be to produce roughly 475 to 500 kilos of milk solid per cow. on a meal input level of around 750 kilos of meal. So 750 kilos of meal is costing around €200. And if you do that in 6,000 litres, you're talking about a meal target of around 3 cent a litre, 3.5 maybe, in that kind of a ballpark.
And moving then to other costs, what are the main costs that farmers are seeing in 2019?
So, some things are kind of creeping up there all the time. The one that jumps out here from the Profit Monitor is the dependence on contractors. So there was the target, or the average from the Profit Monitors in 19 is 1.9 cent per litre, almost 2 cent a litre being spent on contractors. So as herds grow larger, the scale here is 142 cow average. So these are largish farms. There will be on those farms a greater dependence on contractors to spread slurry, to make silage, to do even spread fertilizer on farms. So you'll see the contractor charge in that situation being slightly higher than what would have been perceived as normal years ago, when people did a lot more to work themselves and herd sizes were smaller. But the other thing we're seeing continued investment in fertilizer, and not just in terms of maintaining PEK and nitrogen levels, but also in increasing the status, particularly of PEK and lime on farms. So fertilizer costs this year are averaging 2.4 cent a litre to date, which would be represent a significant enough investment, about €150 a cow, on fertilizer input for the year, which you can argue is probably a positive thing, because some of it will be investment in the longer term status of your farm. On the labour side then, with this group of farmers here, there's over 1.5 cent being spent on labour, 1.6 cent a litre being spent on labour. So dairy farms are showing an ability and a capacity to pay for and hire in labour, so they're providing employment in the local area as well. So that's another kind of a factor that's coming out of the cost here as well. And I suppose the other thing that's kind of creeping into it, I see it creeping up every year, is leases, because as farmers maximise their utilisation of their own farms and fully stock it, they're becoming more and more dependent on leasing land, whether it's adjacent to the farm and putting cows on it, or further away from the farm and using it as support blocks for the main grazing area. So those are the kind of trends we're seeing on the average farm who completed Profit Monitor in 2019.
Part of your analysis, you're comparing the top 25% of farmers with the average that are completing the Profit Monitor. Can you point out any differences between these groups?
Yeah, so when we just rank them by net margin per hectare, and we compare the top 25% with the average, even for the 400 or thereabouts that we have in already. So the top 100 farmers, in terms of net profit per hectare, they achieve a higher gross output. So they're achieving almost a cent per litre more in terms of milk price, because their constituents are higher. They also produce roughly 5% more milk. It doesn't sound like a whole lot, but it's in the order of 250 litres of extra milk per cow per lactation, and their milk solids yield was over 500 kilos per cow, substantial milk yield. And they're able to do that while stocking the cows more highly, and also feeding less meal per cow. Less meal on a per litre basis anyway, slightly more overall, but not much more. So basically they're using a lot more grass than the average farm in the Profit Monitor system at the moment. And overall, the net margin per litre from these farms is around 3.5 cent greater. The net margin per cow to date is around €250 more per cow. And the net margin per hectare on those farms is about €800 higher per hectare. So they're achieving very good levels of technical performance, and they're coupling that with high levels of financial efficiency as well to achieve a very high profit per hectare from the farms.
So I think a general theme running through that is higher stocking rate, less meal, and it's driven by grass utilisation. Can you, I suppose, you don't know the exact farmers, but could you suggest, where they're getting more out of their grass? What time points in the year are they taking advantage of grass more? Yeah,
so what they'll do is you'll find what they have, it's not so much time points as such, Emma-Louise. What they'll have is they'll have the farm set up. It'll be well reseeded. It'll be high index for P and K, so the fertility is really good. And they're just growing grass throughout the year, a lot more grass throughout the year. And then they're able to harvest that grass and convert it into milk solids across the year and into the autumn. And it's by doing a small number of things very right. It's what's making the extra is helping them to grow the extra grass and then getting the benefit from it in terms of extra milk solids and higher profit per hectare.
So then looking at net profit per hectare, we have this target of €2,500 and it seems like it's a target that eludes a lot of people year in, year out. What was the net profit per hectare for 2019 and, what are the small steps that these farmers are missing out on in order to achieve that?
Yeah, so the big driver of a high net profit per hectare is always going to be about grass utilised. So the target that you're talking about, Emma-Louise, of around 2,500 per hectare is based on a base milk price of 30 cent a litre. The base milk price for the farmers in 2019 is going to be somewhat higher than that. It'll be around 32 cent a litre. So even though they achieved 2,500, the top farmers achieved 2,500 of a net margin per hectare. It's only on the dairy hectares and it's off a higher base price. People get very conflicted about trying to achieve the €2,500 per hectare, and most people fail. But my philosophy about all that is it's not about the achievement of the 2.5 that's important. It's about the direction of change that you make each year towards the achievement of it that's important. So if you're making €1,000 for a variety of reasons and can improve that year on year, that's a very positive thing. The other assumption that's being made in it that in that 2,500 target that's set out is that all land is owned, and very few farms that I know are actually all fully owned. Typically on the profit monitor farms, when we analyse the data, about 30 to 40% of the land is actually leased on those farms, and as I mentioned earlier, that's an increasing percentage of the land area that they farm. So achieving the 2,500 is probably is not likely to be achieved, but it's the direction of change that's the most important thing.
And finally, George, we mentioned at the outset that there are a small number of dairy farmers completing the profit monitor. And, talking with you today, it is a really good way of getting a handle on your farm business, where your strong points are and where your weaker points are that you can improve upon to ultimately improve your profit. For farmers who are currently not completing a profit monitor, can you give any advice to them on the steps they can take in order to, I suppose, get this information for their farm?
Okay, so step one is to contact a local Teagasc advisor. Teagasc advisors have the capacity and are interested in helping you to complete profit monitor to allow you to benchmark your farm. So to talk to your local Teagasc person. Then when it comes to data, a lot of the data you already have. So you'll have it on the likes of IFAC accounts or whoever does the accountancy. Your accounts is a good place to start. And the second source of information that is really relevant to completing a profit monitor will be coming from the ICBF site, where there's a lot of data there on the milk volumes and solids, and also on the whole stock numbers, which can be a nightmare for some people. The stock numbers are all already available to you from the ICBF website. So between the Teagasc advisor and using the ICBF support that are there, it's very easy to at least make a start and get a profit monitor completed in the next number of months.
That's great. Thanks for the advice, George. That's it for this week's episode of The Dairy Edge, and my thanks to George Ramsbottom for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify, and for more information go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and join me next time for your Dairy Edge.